What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today we're going to be interviewing ExCultBaby. She has a YouTube channel here, and so you definitely need to go and check her out for one. You can also find her on Twitter at ExCultBaby, and she came out of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So we're going to have a conversation with her about, you know, her relationship with religion in the past and how that changed throughout her life. So if you're interested in this, then please stay tuned. All right, well, welcome. Do you mind being called ExCultBaby, or is there something else?
X is also fine.
Okay.
But yeah, ExCultBaby is fine.
All right, awesome.
If ExCultBaby is too long for you, X is fine.
X. No, ExCultBaby's fine. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, I addressed you the appropriate way. But, so why don't you go ahead and let everybody know, like, you know, who you are and everything.
Okay. Hi, I'm ExCultBaby. I am an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I am an activist, a YouTuber, and an atheist, and all that good stuff. Most of the videos on my channel are dedicated to talking about the Bible stories that I grew up with as a child and why they don't make any sense. Not necessarily from a scholarly viewpoint, from just from like, I'm picking up this story and I'm reading it, and at face value, it's ludicrous.
Yeah.
That's most of what's on my channel. I have some other stuff on there too, but that's the gist of it.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, and you know, Casey and I, we do a daily Bible reading, which is structured just going straight through the Bible instead of centered like on stories. But I do like getting everybody's own and like look at these stories and how ridiculous they are. So it's very much appreciated, your content on YouTube. So why don't you start out by telling us, like, what was like your relationship with religion, you know, in your early life, like childhood, whatever you can remember about that time period.
Right. Well, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, so from as young as I can remember, I was out preaching with my parents, knocking on doors, spreading the good word, and all that. I was very heavily indoctrinated right from the start, so I can't remember a time really when I wasn't religious. I believed everything that my parents told me right up until, you know, my late teenage years. So since I was a child, I was very into my religion. I always took it pretty seriously. There wasn't really ever a time when I was kind of half-hearted about my religion. I've always been pretty like full into it. So yeah, I'd say as a kid, I was pretty much just all in.
Okay, so for a Jehovah's Witness kid, what does that exactly mean? Like when you say you were fully into it, like I'm guessing like Sunday schools, Bible lessons, and all that. But was there anything that made it, I guess, a unique kind of experience?
Well, for me personally, I was also homeschooled, so I dedicated a lot of time to, being out on school nights wasn't an issue because I could sleep in and start my schoolwork whenever. Jehovah's Witnesses, at least back in the day when I was a kid, had like 3 meetings a week. They had a congregation Bible study. And they had another 2-hour long. They had 2 2-hour long meetings. One of them was on a weeknight, and the other one was on a weekend. And then you're expected to preach at least once a week, but sometimes more.
Preach?
Often more. Yes. Like even as a kid, I was expected to go out preaching with everybody else. And on top of that, they have all this study material that they want you to come to the meeting prepared. So all those meetings, you have study material that you have to look at ahead of time. On top of being expected to read the Bible every day and pray and look at, daily Bible scriptures and stuff like that. So there was always lots of material that I was expected to do. Did I always do it regularly as I was expected to? No, because I'm a kid. But there was, at the points where I was the most invested and the most dedicated, I was reading or preaching something biblical pretty much every single day.
Oh, wow. Was there anything in particular that you liked as a kid, like over everything else? Like, was it the preaching or the Bible studying, or was there anything that really kind of you were more excited for than anything?
I never actually really enjoyed any of it, to be completely honest. Like, it wasn't fun. It was something that was expected of me. It was something that I thought was important, but it wasn't fun. Um, I like my favorite thing was probably the congregation Bible study, because the congregation was split up into smaller groups of maybe, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 in like 100-person congregation. So and my dad is an elder in our congregation, which means that he's just like one of the guys that runs the congregation. So he would have people from our book study group meet at our house. So once a week, every week, we would have a bunch of people from my congregation come to our house, and we discuss one book for like an hour. But but it would be a good time, because we would have all these people over at our house, and sometimes we would have goodie night, which is when it would kind of be like a potluck. Everybody would bring a snack. So after the study was over, we'd stay, we'd chat, and we'd eat for a little while. So that was something that I remember very fondly. That was probably one of my favorite things.
Okay, so I guess you more liked the communal aspect of it rather than all of the religious, theology type stuff of it. Okay.
Right. And I definitely needed it, because, like I said, I was homeschooled, so it wasn't like I had a lot of friends. So I was friends with my friends were the adults in my congregation for the most part. I didn't really get along even with the kids in my congregation, because they all went to the same school and I didn't go to school with them, so they were all kind of in a tight knit group, but that I was part of the out group. So yeah, the community aspects were very important to me.
Okay. Now, talking about the homeschooling aspect, we hear a lot of like horror stories, for Christian homeschoolers. I'm wondering, was it like, was it very like Christian oriented, like the homeschooling, or was it more, I guess, secularized? I'm guessing that it's leaning more in the Christian direction, right?
Only in certain aspects. For the most part, it was, with math and stuff like that, it was very basic secular information. And for the most part with science, it was too. Um, my mother had a friend who was her age, and she had children my age, me and my siblings' age, and they would swap out once a week. They would come over to my house, and my mom would do history class, and then once a week we'd go over to their house, and their mom would teach us science class. Now, those science and history classes were definitely not always secular. Um, because they bought their textbooks from homeschool fairs and stuff like that. So they were looking specifically for a Christian type of thing. I remember, though, that I think that the history book that my mom bought was from a young Earth creationist perspective. So she had to like skip the part where they talk about people living at the same time as dinosaurs, because she's like, well, that part didn't happen, but we'll listen to the rest of this. But I'm definitely going to skip that part, because Jehovah's Witnesses aren't young Earth creationists, even though they are creationists. So, looking for Christian textbooks, you're going to find some that are a little more Christian than others, But in most of it, it was secular. But in stuff like that, they would kind of pick and choose stuff that fit their narrative a little bit better.
Right. The horror stories that I'm thinking about are like this one interview with a woman and her child, and like the child couldn't relay basic arithmetic information, like, what's 5 times 5. The mother was like, oh, she doesn't know that all that well, but she can recite up to a third of the Bible from memory.
Oh, Jesus. Oh my God. No, it was not that bad. We had a basic level, like we had basic schooling. Like I did algebra and stuff like that. I remember going alone in the living room, going through my multiplication tables, flashcards and stuff like that. My parents were very big into literature. My parents are both lovers of the English language. My mom took us to the library all the time as kids. That was like the number one place that we were if we weren't at a park or we weren't at home doing homeschool stuff. we were probably at a library, well, or at our congregation meetings, but like secularly speaking, we were often at libraries and stuff like that. My parents valued our education a lot, and to them, that was why they wanted us to be homeschooled, was because they wanted us to learn the right things. It wasn't like they were just focused on, the Christian aspects of it, although that was very important to them, was to make sure that we weren't, like deluded by the world and their secular education and teaching us about evolution and all that. But they wanted to take our education into their own hands to make sure it was the best that it could be. Does that logically follow necessarily? No. The person who's probably best qualified would be a teacher who went to school for that. But in their minds, that was their goal.
Yeah. Did you notice, like, other than, like, with those community type situations that you were put into, did you notice any other ways that maybe you were, I guess, maybe not exactly stunted by your homeschooling, but just different, like, than the other people that you guys knew?
I was emotionally stunted, or I felt like I was socially stunted for the most part. In fact, in a very big way. I also had ADHD, and it went undiagnosed for a while, so I didn't have medication. I felt like when I was in groups with other kids, I did not know how to function correctly. I always felt like I stood out. I always felt like I was making myself stand out by acting like a crazy person, but I couldn't make myself not act like a crazy person. Like, I knew that my hyperactivity was showing. I knew that I was, acting out, but I couldn't make myself act any other way. I didn't know how. And I will, even though there were some benefits, I think, in my childhood to being homeschooled, I'm kind of against it because it put me at such a huge disadvantage socially. I really only knew how to talk to adults. Like, I didn't know how to talk to my peers. And it benefited me when I was talking to adults. Everyone was like, "Oh, you're so mature. Look at you." But when I was talking to my own peers, I didn't know how to interact with them. So it definitely held me back in that sense as well. I went into public school in my junior year, and that was when I really felt the effects of how socially stunted I was, because I was like, I had such a difficult time making and keeping friends. I was lost, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh about it, but I can understand how yeah, you could feel that way. But talking about moving into public school, like, what was some big differences, like, from transitioning from homeschool and having a lot of the Jehovah's Witness theology and everything around your life, to moving to a public school where everything wasn't so, like, didn't have that Christian aspect to it, I guess. Like, what was that like for you?
Well, by that point, I'd already started to kind of lead a double life. Like, by the time I think that I started public school, I already had a boyfriend who I had met at a one of my volunteer jobs. I wasn't allowed to date, of course, but I was secretly. Um, so I'd already kind of, I at that point, I wanted to be more like my peers. I wanted to be more like the worldly kids. I didn't really I had such a difficult time fitting in anywhere, but I felt that people outside of the Jehovah's Witness group tended to be more accepting. So I felt like I had a better chance there, I guess. And I had the 2 years prior to that, my freshman and sophomore year, I'd been taking online classes. And to be completely honest, most of that time that I was supposed to be taking online classes was just spent on Tumblr. So I already kind of had I had an idea of what was outside of the Jehovah's Witness world. I had some exposure via the internet to what other people were like, to what my peers were like. Um, but being actually involved in that environment of being with my peers, it was certainly different. I knew that I stood out. I knew that I couldn't help it. I was used to doing things a completely different way. in my English classes, I almost always ended up reading like half the book that we were reading because I was the best reader in the class. Like I couldn't understand why other people had so much difficulty reading aloud because it was very natural for me. But that was part of my Jehovah's Witness upbringing as well as, you know, just being surrounded by parents who are so like, you have to read every day. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it was definitely different. But I really just wish that I had that exposure earlier in life, so I didn't feel like I was being thrown to the wolves, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. You talking about living a double life, having a boyfriend, kind of stepping outside of the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle. I'm wondering, when exactly did you start like questioning the Jehovah's Witnesses, at least?
I actually did not deconvert until after I was kicked out of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh,
Yeah. So while I was in it, even though I was doing everything wrong, I still believed it was true. So I didn't think that they were wrong. I thought I was wrong, and I felt incredibly guilty for it all the time. I just went through basically my high school years just constantly feeling torn and feeling guilty. And there was some suicidal ideation. I didn't feel like I wanted to kill myself. I just wished that I were dead, you know? I
yeah.
wish that I would just fall asleep and not wake up, and it would just, you know.
No, I definitely know that probably better than I should. But I'm wondering what happened that caused you to get thrown out.
So, well, backtracking a little bit. In my, was it my junior year or was it in my senior year of high school, I met this guy, and he was, well, he was really nice. We became friends really quickly. We bonded over. At the time, I was very interested in writing, and he was also a writer. And I was trying to write a novel, and he was kind of giving me critique because we had very similar styles of writing, as far as we kind of looked at things the same way as sort of like character-driven stories. So he had a lot of valuable advice for me, and we just became friends. And um, he was a trans guy, so he exposed me to a lot of stuff with the LGBT that I was not necessarily unaware of, but that I like really understanding it as opposed to just being exposed to it and knowing about it. Um, at that time, I identified as bisexual, and I had told my parents, and their reaction was, it wasn't hateful, but it was just kind of like, you'll probably grow out of it, and if you don't, oh well, we all struggle with sinful inclinations. You know, they didn't make too big of a deal about it, which was good, but at the same time, you know, it could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse too. So I didn't mind it, that reaction at the time. But anyways, fast forward to uh, a year or two after I graduated, and I start dating this guy. And I'm actually, well, he actually had a girlfriend, so we were kind of in like a polyamorous relationship, the three of us. And I'd been, you know, struggling with these feelings of being torn and being guilty for years, and I kind of finally went to the point where it was like, you know what, I really care about these people, I want this relationship to work, and it's not going to work if I stay at home. It's just not going to work. So I had been making plans to leave. And by making plans, I mean I thought about it, but I didn't actually put anything into motion until one day I was preparing for some kind of special meeting, like a congregation meeting. I don't know what happened at it because I didn't end up going to it, but I was getting ready to leave. I was all dressed and ready to go. And at this point, I loathed going to meetings at this point because I was just thinking about getting out. But I was getting ready to go anyway. My dad marches me up to my room, and he's like, look at this pigsty. This is ungodly. This is unchristian. This is disgusting. This is filthy. You need to clean this up. You know, this isn't the way that a Christian lives. And Jehovah's Witnesses, if you don't know, you know, they're very culty. They're very much a cult. control every aspect of your life. And that really is like kind of a Jehovah's Witness doctrine, that if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you need to keep your whole life in order, basically, to reflect God in everything that you do. So this wasn't just my dad's opinion. This is something that probably a lot of Jehovah's Witness parents have said to their kids at some point. But basically, he told me that I had to stay behind and stay home and finish cleaning up my room before I could even go. And I was just kind of fed up at that point. And instead of cleaning my room, I just started packing. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew that I just couldn't stay anymore. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I know that that seems like a silly thing to be like, you know what, this is the last straw. But there were a lot of straws leading up to that straw. And I was just really fed up at that point. So that was when I ended up moving out. And a day or two after that, I spent the night at my boyfriend's house. And maybe the next day, and that was, I guess, that I lost my virginity. And I guess I wasn't planning to do that exactly, but it was just what happened. Because, like I said, I knew that I wasn't going to progress at all in our relationship if I didn't leave home. And that was kind of the goal. So maybe the day after that, my aunt has me over for dinner because she wants to encourage me spiritually. And I end up revealing to her that I have committed a very serious sin. And she's like, well, you know that now that I know this, you either have to tell the elders or I will. And this is something that I expected. I know that that sounds like totally insane. This is something that I completely expected because Jehovah's Witnesses have a very strong snitching policy, essentially. You know, if you find out about wrongdoing that somebody else is involved with, you basically have to tell them, you're going to tell the elders or I will. So I expected that. And so I had the meeting with the elders and I told them everything that happened in nitty-gritty detail. And it was very uncomfortable. And they asked me some questions that made me extremely uncomfortable. At one point, one of them accused me of lying because I said, well, after that, we stopped. We didn't do anything else. And he said, I don't believe that a guy would just stop after that point. And I was like, well, we did. And I've already told you all this other stuff that I've done. What would be the point of lying to you? You know, I've told you everything else I've done. Why would I be lying about that? But yeah, I know. But after that, I said basically, well, do I feel shamed about this? Yes. Do I feel guilty about it? No. Am I probably going to do it again? Yeah. So I basically gave them no choice but to disfellowship me, which is Jehovah's Witness excommunication. So a week later, they announced it at the congregation meeting. And since then, I haven't had very much contact with anybody in my family. But that was how I officially left the congregation.
Yeah. Well, how's that been for you, like emotionally and stuff? Is it like pretty hard being removed from your family and everybody that you knew?
Yeah, it is really rough. My family on both sides of my family, all the way out to my grandparents on both sides, are all Jehovah's Witnesses except for like one aunt who's also disfellowshipped. So being away from them is really hard. Being away from all the friends that I made over the years is really hard. I live in a different city now than I grew up in, which is good because running into all of those people all the time was really hard because they didn't talk to me, you know? They would just look at me and then they'd look away, or they'd kind of stare a little bit and then look away. And it was just really, really difficult. And it's difficult all the time. But at the same time, I'm glad that I'm out now that I'm out. And I would rather have the emotional heartache of being shunned by all these people than the feelings that I had when I was in it and how terrible I always felt just for living my life. Because at the time I felt like I was like the worst person ever, you know? I felt like I was rightfully guilty. And now I'm looking back and, you know, I wasn't doing anything that hurt anybody. There was no reason for me to feel that guilty.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you come to realize that, though. That's an important part. You realize that, you know, there was no reason to feel any kind of shame or anything like that. I was going to say, I have like, I cannot fathom whatsoever anything that my son could do that would make me want to just never talk to him again. Like, I don't even understand that mindset. Like, even as a Christian, I couldn't fathom not talking to somebody just because they had a different religious belief, or they did one particular thing that was not actually bad. Like, I get that they think that it's bad or it's incredibly sinful or whatnot, but I don't know. I can't fathom that particular mindset.
Honestly, me neither. Pretty much ever since I deconverted, I've had a hard time even getting into the mindset of a Jehovah's Witness again. Once I was free of that indoctrination, I can't put myself back in their shoes anymore. I can't even grasp how they think the way that they think. I know that I thought the exact same way at some point in my life, but there's such a huge disconnect from reality that I can't even put myself in that headspace anymore.
I know exactly how you feel because I'm the same way with just Christianity in general. Like, I can't ever fathom myself believing in Jesus or God or anything like that again. It seems just so incredibly ridiculous to me to believe in it, that every time somebody or a Christian is like, well, I'll pray that you find Jesus again. It's like, don't worry. I search for him on Google. I find him every day.
Yeah, like, don't worry. He finds me all the time. I can't seem to get away from the guy.
I know. and then they think that, like, oh, nobody has heard of this Jesus guy. We need to let people know about Jesus.
Oh, yeah. Jehovah's Witnesses are the worst about it, let me tell you, because it's not like whenever I go to the door and I share a scripture with somebody and they're like, wow, huh, that's great, bye. Like, it's not like these people have never heard of scripture before. It's that they know what the Bible is. It's not that and it's really funny because when I remember when I thought that what I thought was the truth, and they literally call their religion the truth. Jehovah's Witnesses refer to the Jehovah's Witness religion as the truth. But when I believed that, and whenever I would share something with somebody who wasn't a believer, I couldn't understand why they didn't just immediately go like, wow, that's the truth, isn't it? That's amazing. I can't believe I've never thought of that before. You know, like, I couldn't understand why everybody else didn't see it as obviously as I saw it. Now it's pretty obvious because it's not true.
Right. Well, speaking of, like, having other people identify, like, how crazy this idea is, looking back on what you actually believed, what is the craziest idea of the Jehovah's Witnesses that you believed?
There are a lot of them, to be honest. There are a lot of crazy beliefs. Oh man, the craziest. Let me just preface with I've never been good at picking a top anything. I don't even have a favorite movie. I could barely pick a favorite color. You know, like, I can't pick a top anything. So I'm going to probably list a couple of things. But Jehovah's Witnesses believe that getting blood transfusions is a sin. So that's kind of a big one because it's literally killed thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses for no reason at all. So that's a pretty big one because it's just like, why? Why? Oh, well, in the Bible it says to abstain from blood and don't eat blood. Yeah, they mean the killing kind, not the life-saving kind. And that should be perfectly obvious. How would you even nobody who's looking at that scripture would immediately interpret it that way. No one. So either God has done a very poor job of conveying his message, or you just made that shit up, you know?
No, yeah, I completely agree. It is most definitely just made the fuck up.
That's probably I'll let that be the biggest, most crazy one because not only is it incredibly harmful, but it's so very loosely based in scripture that it's just ridiculous to even assert that that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, so moving on from how you left Jehovah's Witnesses, do you identify as an atheist now, or you do? Okay. So what convinced you that the God of the Bible wasn't like a real thing?
So a few months after I moved out and got disfellowshipped, I got out of the polyamorous relationship that I was in, and a few weeks later, I met my new boyfriend, who is now my fiance.
Congrats.
Thank you. He's the best. But he's an atheist, and he was an atheist long before we started dating. And the funny thing is, I'd had atheist friends in high school, and I'd always thought that I'd always gotten along very well with atheists. I never had the view that atheists were evil people. I was never taught that atheists were worshippers of Satan. I'd never heard these things about, atheists have no morals. I understood in my own head that I thought, how could atheists have morals? But I also knew atheists who were moral people, so I never asked that question because it was transparently stupid. It's like, well, you're clearly not an evil asshole, so why would I ask you, how could you possibly have morals? Because clearly you do. But, which, again, even as a Christian, that seemed fairly obvious to me that, but I digress. So I'm with this guy, and he's an atheist, and he is having such a hard time because I'm having breakdowns in the middle of the night where I'm just bawling about missing my parents and about dying in Armageddon and all of this like really really deep shit. And he is not even remotely religious. So he's like having a really tough time understanding and helping me with this. He does his best, but he's having a really tough time. And at times when it's not quite so heavy, he'll ask me questions about what I believed as a Jehovah's Witness and what Jehovah's Witnesses teach. And he does some research for himself. And sometimes we get into discussions about religion. And sometimes he asks me questions that I can't answer. Because now that I'm not reading the Bible every day, and I'm not being constant, like my indoctrination isn't being constantly reaffirmed, I don't have as quick of answers. And I don't have as strong of a cognitive dissonance anymore. It's that kind of mental blockage of just like, this is true though, is weakening very quickly, especially the more he points out stuff that just doesn't quite make sense, but in my head I'm still kind of like, but it just is true. But every time I say that, it's a little weaker. And he would watch atheist programs. Like, he was a really big fan of the Atheist Experience, and occasionally, and Rationality Rules. Those were some of his favorite channels that he would go to. Cosmic Skeptic. And he'd occasionally have them on while I was in the room or while we were in the car, and he'd be listening to a podcast or something. And most of the time, I didn't ask him to turn them off because I didn't mind for the most part. They weren't strictly talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, so I guess I didn't really care. And at one point, he was watching an episode of the Atheist Experience, and I think it was Matt Dillahunty and Jamie Boone was co-hosting, I think. And they were talking to this woman who had lost a family member in death, and she was just kind of like, the idea that atheists can cope with death without the idea that they'll see their loved ones again in heaven is like really hard to think about for her. And that she had been convinced, well, that a pastor or a preacher or something had told her that her sister had committed suicide, so she was actually going to hell, and and how terrible that was. And Matt made a really good point about how just the teaching that that the soul never really dies and that people will live forever and they'll see their family member again is a detriment to people who are grieving, because it makes it difficult for them to properly cope with a person's death, because they're not fully accepting that they are gone. And that kind of realization, basically, that, religion is doing something that is fundamentally harmful. And this is a very basic religious teaching, just that the soul lives on. That in and of itself is psychologically damaging. And that was really kind of when it all fell apart for me. Just that thought of like, religion has done something that is fundamentally harmful. just very basic teaching that just hurts people. And I kind of just like broke down, and I was just like, I guess I'm an atheist now, because none of this shit adds up. And pretty much as soon as that mental barrier went down, I started to see all the flaws. I saw it in everything. And I looked back at the Bible, and it was just utterly ridiculous. All of these moral atrocities, it all kind of came down at once. It was not gradual. It was not well at that point. It was not gradual for me. It all just came crumbling down, and it all kind of just made sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because I didn't have like I guess I should ask. Do you consider your switch, I guess, to atheism more of a light switch or more of a long process?
For me, it was a light switch. There was a process between then when religion was hurting me, and I was kind of there was this cognitive dissonance stage where people were telling me, Rachel, it's okay, you can live your life now. And I was like, I know, but I'm going to die and I'm evil. But I don't feel evil, but I am. It was really touch and go for a while, that cognitive dissonance. And as soon as that was gone, it all just disappeared. It was like a light switch at that point.
Okay, yeah, no, I had the exact same thing, except like I had a long process of trying to figure out what I actually believed, but as soon as I, thought about it and thought about whether or not I actually believed in a God, it was a light switch for me too. I just stopped believing, and it was a long process to get to that point, but it really is like just a light switch that flipped off for me, and I didn't necessarily see all of the flaws at first because I had never really been all that religious to begin with. So I had never really read like every single bit of the Bible. I had only been taught those, specifically selected portions that they wanted to teach me in school. So, it was like a light switch. And then every time that I encountered something new that I hadn't really read in the Bible or experienced from Christians yet, like I saw it with a whole new like lens, or well, I guess rather I had taken the Christian lens off, or theistic lens off, and I could see it for what it really was. So yeah. I totally empathize with that feeling. So looking back on your transition from Jehovah's Witness to just I guess still a Jehovah's Witness but not formally in it, and then to atheist. How have you changed in that? Like, has your personality changed? Has your view on certain, like, socio-political topics changed? I guess just, how have you changed in general from comparing yourself now to yourself in the past?
So, Jehovah's Witnesses are they're homophobic in a love the sinner, hate the sin kind of way. And I struggled with that for a while. I was like, oh yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses. I remember I had this embarrassingly long Tumblr post explaining how Jehovah's Witnesses aren't homophobes. They're not. We love all people, but being gay is a sin. Well, doing gay sex is a sin. You just don't have to do gay sex. And then I was bi, and it was like, oh, now it's me. But it was still like, well, my parents didn't cast me out of their home immediately, and they didn't say anything that was mean or hurtful. And my siblings haven't said anything that was mean or hurtful. My friends that I told were all very supportive and didn't say anything mean or hurtful. So I guess it's fine. And then after I got out, I was like, yeah, that was pretty bad. It was still pretty bad. Because they all were like, oh, Rachel, that's okay. You're never going to date a woman. Ever, right? And as long as that's the case, then it's fine. As long as you don't do the gay, it's okay.
That sounds like a motto for Christians. Don't do the gay, you'll be okay.
Pretty much. As long as you don't do the gay, it's okay if you like want to do the gay, just don't do the gay. So I guess that was something that changed along the process for me. But for the most part, like I said before, I was already somewhat exposed to the outside world through the internet because I spent almost all day in front of the computer for like 2 years. Yeah, I had some exposure to the outside world. I definitely was getting very I had a lot of political views, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't get involved in politics, so I really wasn't allowed to share them. I wasn't allowed to like, and so I didn't express them for the most part. But I think the thing is, I kind of already was who I was when I left the religion. Even when I was in the religion, I kind of already was who I was. I just didn't feel like I was fully allowed to be all of those things and to express all of those things until I became an atheist. And then I was fully like, I'm just going to live my life. And I already had all these ideas. I already had all these ideologies. I just never really expressed them because they were contrary in some way to what I already believed. So with that belief gone, it was literally just kind of like a light switch. It's like, and now I'm me. I'm completely me. Just me.
Well, how was that feeling though? Like that when that light switch, got flipped. I mean, did you feel like a lot of weight was lifted off your shoulders, or what did you feel?
I felt totally like liberated. For one thing, I didn't think I was going to die in Armageddon anymore. And Jehovah's Witnesses are like very strongly pushing this Armageddon is just around the corner narrative. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses practically brag about it. They're like, yeah, the end was supposed to come 100 years ago, but it's 100 years later and we're still doing what we're doing. Yay. My grandparents thought they were gonna, that paradise would be around the corner before they had kids. My parents were told that Armageddon would come before they graduated high school. I was told that Armageddon was going to come before I graduated high school. Pretty much every Jehovah's Witness hears this, and now it's like, oh, nobody's going to die. It's fine. I'm not going to die. It's fine. It was extremely relieving. And yeah, that was one of the things that was weighing me down the most. And my grandfather had died of cancer a few years before. And one of the things that had kept me in as long as I was in was thinking that if I wasn't a good Jehovah's Witness, I wasn't going to see him again. So once I was kind of liberated of that religious thinking, it was like I was never going to see him again, and that's okay. Because he's not going to see anybody again. He was in suffering and in pain, and now he's not, and it's over, and that's totally fine. Like it kind of all snapped into place at once, and everything just made sense, and it was such a relief.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. There was a lot of like weight that was lifted off my shoulders too when I flipped that switch. So I can totally empathize with that as well. So now you got a fiance and life's going. I mean, do you feel? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do you feel about your future, just in general, after leaving them behind? Do you hope that you can reconnect in the future with your family at some point? Do you think that you will, or what do you think the future holds as far as being an ex-Jehovah's Witness?
As far as my family is concerned, I'm not optimistic. I still have a little hope for my younger brother because he's a lot like me. But, yeah, I don't really hold out a lot of hope for them. But at the same time, who knows? Because Jehovah's Witnesses are so strict that it's almost it's difficult to stay in. So yeah, I honestly don't know, but I'm not very optimistic. But I've kind of just accepted that. Like it's a really painful truth, but I'm pretty sure it's the truth. That I'm probably never going to have the same relationship with my family that I did before. They're probably going to stay indoctrinated until the day they die. I'm probably going to have to go to a really gross Jehovah's Witness funeral for my parents. And the Jehovah's Witness funeral talks are like, the first 2 minutes are about the person that actually died. And then they're like, and you know what this person loved? Jehovah and preaching. And let me tell you what they preached about. And then it just goes into a sermon. So that has nothing to do with that person. And that thought makes me really upset, but I also realize that it's probably the closest to reality that I know of right now. My parents are, my parents and my siblings are most likely going to live and die Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of contact with them for the rest of my life. And I don't know. I guess that for the most part, I've just accepted that. It's very upsetting. I'm definitely not happy about it, and I wish that it weren't true, but yeah. People tell me all the time that don't know the full details of the situation. They're like, I'm sure your parents will come around. And I'm like, they probably won't, but I appreciate the thought.
Yeah, is it particularly hard, like, whenever that topic comes up for you, or is it pretty easygoing now?
It kind of comes in spurts. The last time I really had a difficulty with it was Mother's Day. Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate holidays, but that was really like everybody talking about the plans they have with their moms. They're going to go out to eat. They're going to watch a movie. They're going to even just be together. Really, that really, like, I had a really shitty day on Mother's Day, and I texted my mom, I love you, and she texted back, thanks, which was really like, damn, like, I expected you to at least say I love you back. Ow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm kind of surprised that she responded in the first place. I mean, I thought that, like, they weren't supposed to have any kind of contact with you.
Well, they're not. My parents still, my parents know that I'm not, for the most part, going to contact them frivolously. So if I call them, they will answer the phone because they expect it to be some kind of emergency. The last time I called my dad, I was at a doctor's appointment and I needed to fill out emergency contacts. And because Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate their birthdays, I didn't remember what my parents' birthdays were. So I called my dad to ask, and he answered the phone and he told me, and we said goodbye, and that was it. But so they'll pick up the phone when I call them, but the day that I start picking up the phone just to chat with them is the day they'll stop answering the phone. So I try to be kind of careful with my communication with them so I don't lose the little communication that I have.
I'm really sorry that you've got to go through that. That's got to be especially hard for you, because I know it would be for me.
Yeah, and I'm honestly glad that that's not a 100% common experience with religion. It is with some religions, and it is with some extreme people, even that people that aren't in extreme religions, but they just take it that seriously. But I'm glad that that isn't everyone's experience, because it really sucks. I don't know what else to say except that it really sucks.
I think that most everybody's going to be able to empathize, with how much that sucks. Now, generally, at the end of these kind of interviews, I usually ask, like, what would you say to a younger you, or just somebody in the position that you were in, like when you started, I guess transitioning out of Jehovah's Witnesses, or when, you started noticing holes in the biblical narrative. Like, what would you say to somebody in those positions?
If I were talking to a younger me, or just someone in my position, I would tell them, first of all, you are not legally old enough to buy a gun, and you're not legally old enough to drink. Don't make a decision dedicating your life to a religion that will alter your life forever now. At the very least, that is a decision for an adult. And it's shameful that Jehovah's Witnesses encourage children to make that kind of decision, because you can't get shunned unless you are baptized. But they encourage kids to get baptized as young as like 9. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I guess that's a little bit better than, like, the Catholics. Have you seen those videos where they dunk the babies like they're just?
Yeah, that freaks me out. But when somebody baptizes a baby, they don't expect the baby to hold to all the vows of Catholicism forever and ever, or be shunned. Like,
That's a good point.
It's more symbolic. It's more about the family and the parents saying, I plan to raise my child as a Catholic, than the child making a promise to God that they will forever and ever be a Catholic. That's confirmation or something like that. But, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, and they frown upon child baptism, but obviously their definitions of baptism are very different. So, you know.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I would say to somebody in my position is, and this is really important to me, I think, if truth will always withstand scrutiny. And if you're not allowed to question something, and you're not allowed to use secular sources to research something, then they are hiding something. And you should find out what it is. And you know what? If it's as true as you believe it is, it will withstand whatever lies are put up against it. Because you should be able to tell the truth from a lie. You should be able to do enough research to find out what is true and what is not. And just hearing a lie about something that you hold very dearly is not going to shake you enough to completely stop believing in it. If you find out something that's true that makes you question it, then you should question it. So basically, I would tell myself to, because Jehovah's Witnesses very heavily discourage their members from looking up information about Jehovah's Witnesses outside of their own, you know, like approved resources that come from them. And that's one of the big things that keep Jehovah's Witnesses in, really, is that they just are heavily discouraged from looking at anything that talks shit about Jehovah's Witnesses, true or not true.
Yeah. What about, you know, somebody struggling with their sexuality as far as, like, religion is concerned, like feeling that shame and guilt of feeling that way? What would you say to that, like, aspect of things?
Sex and sexuality are made to be a really big deal. It's not. It's an activity like eating food. Some people do it more than others. Some people do it with people of the same gender. Some people do it with people of a different gender. And it literally does not matter. It makes no difference whatsoever. You're not a bad person for feeling attracted to people of the same sex. You're not a bad person for not feeling sexual attraction at all. It is so irrelevant in the grand scheme of things who you are attracted to, and if you do not want to have sex, or who you want to have sex with. It is entirely irrelevant to anything of importance. What matters is the kind of person that you are, and a God who would judge you for that isn't one worth worshiping. Sounds like a jerk.
I completely agree. Well, thank you, ExCultBaby, for joining us on this interview today. I really appreciate having you on here and having your story out there. I know that you've been kind of making the rounds on the YouTube channels and whatnot, because I know you were on Telltale Atheist podcast, right? Talking about your experiences, and then you were on Non Sequitur talking too. So, or Opinionated, sorry. You were on Opinionated.
I feel like I tell a slightly different version of the story with different details every time. So far, I'm not bored of it.
Well, I'm glad that you had a good time kind of recounting this today. And everybody right now, if you have not subscribed to ExCultBaby, you might want to go over there and subscribe. ExCultBaby, you want to tell people where they can find you all across the interwebs?
My YouTube channel is ExCultBaby. You can also find me on Twitter at ExCultBaby. That's EX, not just X. It's all one word. That's the social media that I use the most. That's the one I recommend you looking me up on, because I have an Instagram. I hardly ever use it. So that if you want to keep up with me, that's the place to go.
Definitely. I follow her on the twatters, and so everybody else should too. Also, subscribe to her and hit that bell, because she's got a lot of great content, and you definitely want to hear it from her perspective. So go there, subscribe now. Well, like I said, thank you so much for joining me today, ExCultBaby, and I guess we'll be seeing you around the community in general.
I hope so. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, heathens. Well, if you haven't left your comment down below right now, definitely go down there and leave your comments, leave your thoughts on ExCultBaby's story here. Also, if you will, smash that like button and subscribe to not only ExCultBaby, but this channel if you like these kind of interviews. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. I'll see you heathens later.